Good evening. I'm talking to Lynn Friedman today, mainly about her parents and how they survived the Holocaust. Uh, Many of you will know that's a subject near and dear to me. Maybe the wrong words to use, but you know what I mean. Um, yeah, Lynn, first of all, tell something about yourself. I understand you're also involved in psychotherapy. Tell us more
Yes.
about your own work before we get into the story of your
Okay.
parents.
I'm a 67-year-old female living outside of Philadelphia. I'm a full-time psychotherapist by practice. I rescue animals and I have a as a volunteer. And I have worked with trauma. My specialty is trauma. So
Okay.
I was raised by two Holocaust survivors that were very traumatized. And I think I just naturally fell into the work.
Yeah, but I I've met many second generation uh, Holocaust survivors. They often go into that line of work. So I don't know why that is. Maybe it's because of the Holocaust, I suppose. But you did
Yeah.
mention your parents there, so we might as well go straight into it now. Who were they? How did they survive? Uh, and what impact had it on you growing up as a daughter of two Holocaust survivors?
So my parents had very different stories. So I'll give you a little summary of each,
Yeah.
if that's good. My mother was born in Czechoslovakia in 19, well, actually it's 1927, although she lied to us and told us she was born in 29. That's a whole nother story. She switched, her older sister um, was killed by the Nazis. And when she was in Dachau, she quickly realized that the line of people her age were going to gas chambers or something terrible. So she switched birth dates, which she never told us, even when we celebrated all these years of birthdays on a different day. And
Yeah.
she died with that secret. And I found documents otherwise. So she was born in 1929, 27. And her mother was involved in an underground movement to try and save some Polish children. So they had somehow these women, was a group of women, would march children from one place, from out of Poland, sort of like a kinder transport on foot. And she would meet these children and then she would cross them over the border of Hungary, which was not yet, had not fallen yet to the
Mm.
Nazis. Um, and hide them in Christian homes, buy Christian papers. And she did this for a number of years to save children. And as she realized that they were doomed and things were getting closer and closer, the Nazis were invading closer and closer. In 1942, she marched my mother, my mother's older sister, two older sisters, and older brother over the border in Hungary and hid her children. My mother's brother actually went into the army because he was a little bit older, and she bought Christian papers for three different families in Budapest. And my mother and her two siblings were hidden in Budapest. The older one, Lily, I think she had some kind of brain trauma or something, and she went to the train station in Budapest to buy tickets to go home for Passover, and the Nazis murdered her at the train station. So
Okay.
then it was my mother and one other sister that were surviving, and that's the birth date that my mother took of her sister Lily, who was killed by the Nazis. So in 1944, the Nazis rounded up all the Jews in Budapest. And my mother didn't talk much about it, so this is as much as I really know. And then
Yeah.
my mother was basically taken to Dachau, where she saw the two lines forming, and um, she told us that she was used as an interpreter because she spoke seven languages. But it was not uncommon for people in that region to speak many languages because the borders kept being invaded. So one day it was
Yeah.
Hungary, and one day it was Czechoslovakia, one day it was White Russia. she would say that my sister and I suspect that she was used sexually by the Nazis because she had a lot of issues around her sexuality and stuff she told us. The way she handled the whole issue of sexuality with us, with her two daughters. And so, but she was liberated from Dachau in 45.
In April 45, okay.
Yeah,
But
so
it's not uncommon though for survivors not to talk too much about their ordeals. I've heard it so many times,
yeah,
which I can understand in a way. But I mean, something the trauma they went through is not something you want to bring up all the time. So, yeah. But no, that's
and
totally
what's
understandable.
interesting is that when the survivors started to talk was after the 67 war,
Yeah,
when the Jewish prototype was not as much a victim but more victorious. That's when the story started coming out,
yeah.
which is really interesting. And they needed a context that was, where they could see themselves not as victims.
Okay,
You know,
that's interesting actually. Yeah,
and it's an
uh,
interesting side point that I've
yeah,
noticed.
yeah. No,
Can't
but
help it when you're a therapist, you pick up that
that's it. Like that's it.
occupational hazard. So that's my mother's story in a nutshell. My father's story is much more extensive because he was Polish. So Poland was invaded in 39, and he was, as far as I know, arrested and taken to Auschwitz. Um, now I have to tell you that I'm telling you this story, but it's only for pieces that I've put together
Yeah,
because I was a child when he told me these stories. He died when I was 18, and but he was very sick, and so for many years I was sort of assigned to watch after him because he had seizures and stuff like that. He'd been beaten by the Nazis and ruined. I mean, he survived, but he survived a lot of medical complications. So the stories he would tell me when I was 10, 11, and 12 years old didn't quite make sense to me, but now they do. You know what I mean? I sort of put them together. For example, he would tell me he came from a pretty wealthy family in Krakow, and his mother they had a big apartment building, 30 different apartments, and the different siblings in their families lived in these large apartments, but they all lived under one roof. And on the bottom floor was a bakery, which is Friedman's Bakery, my last name. And he would tell me that after the Nazis invaded, he would scale down these buildings in the middle of the night, and I would sort of imagine him like Superman going down the
yeah,
buildings, and that the workers, even though they obviously threw out, everybody in the bakery, the workers were still there because the Nazis were living in Krakow. They had a lot of the senior military in Krakow, which is why
yeah,
Krakow was not bombed. It still is in one piece. And they would use the bread and the bakery stuff from the bakery. So they kept the bakery going with the Christian workers. And he would tell me that the Christian workers would leave the day old bread for him. And because they knew him, because he, was the son of the bakers.
yeah,
And he would scale down these buildings in the middle of the night and take the bread and then climb back up the buildings and run on the rooftops and throw the bread through the rooftops. So my image at 10 years old was like he was like almost like Santa. Well, first of all, it was like Spider-Man, he's scaling
yeah,
these big buildings. And then he's like Santa Claus dropping, instead of gifts, dropping bread down people's chimneys or whatever. Now I've come to put together that he was in the Krakow ghetto and he was doing partisan work already. He was only 14. He was blonde hair, blue eyed, or light brown hair, blue eyed. So he could pass for Aryan.
hmm,
And they would send him out in the middle of the night to get out of and climb out of the Krakow ghetto, sneak out, get the bread, and try and bring the bread back and try and feed some of the people because they were starving in the ghetto.
yeah. I mean, that's amazing. To be honest, it sounds a bit like a superhero there, really, doesn't he? Doing that, like even age 14. Yeah, I mean, that's
Isn't
quite
that
a feat.
crazy?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
know he was an amazing man. And he told me, his story is so different than so many others because it's stories of resilience. Even though he died from the beatings, he wasn't sorry that he did all the things he did to try and save lives.
Yeah.
And the partisans made a commitment that even if they were captured and went into concentration camps, they would still work to save lives in the camps. So even in the camps, he was stealing potato peels and stuff like that and trying to get them to people to help feed people, you know. And there was a whole black market with the Nazis. Apparently, the soldiers with cigarettes. I mean, it was all kinds of stuff. He would tell me. I only understood them through a young child's eyes. You know what I mean? You know, he died by the time I could get anything really clarified. And that summary that I said to you kind of helped me a lot. It helped me put it together, you know. So he was caught. He was in Auschwitz. He escaped Auschwitz in 1942. He went to, he was first put to the Krakow ghetto. Then he was sent to Auschwitz. Then he escaped Auschwitz. He was in the forest with the partisans training to fight Nazis and booby trap Nazis. He would tell me these stories, but I didn't understand what he was saying to me. He was telling me, but I didn't understand. And in 1944, when Hungary fell to the Jews, you know, all of the partisans went to Hungary to try and get the Jews out. So he was up in Hungary in 44 and rearrested. And so, and that's when he was sent to Dachau. I mean, he was sent to a number of camps, but it ended up in Dachau. You know, he was in Stachenhau. You know, he was in a bunch of them. He was 5 different camps.
Is that where your parents met in Dachau, or was it after the war?
So the story was, you want to hear a romance story? My mother was in the women's lager. My father took the potato peels and dug. He was very skinny and very athletic, you know, very strong. Dug all the way under the electric fence that separated the men from the women in Dachau, and would come up and hand her the potato peels for the women. So my parents met when he was underneath the fence. She was the one that was taking the potato peels for the women's lager.
Yeah, I mean, I visited Dachau last year, and yeah, that's quite something because
that fence, that
yeah, it was
electric,
electrified. Yeah,
that people would throw themselves against when they couldn't take it anymore. Because he
yeah.
would tell me those stories. Come on, buddy. Sorry, I've got a dog who wants to come on. Come on, mama. So yeah. So he was caught and he was beaten. And here's another unbelievable story. This story, I have really unbelievable stories. Um, he was beaten. This happened where he got caught stealing the potato peels. Happened right before liberation, and the Nazis were beating everybody. My mother ended up being taken on the march, you know, because they tried to get as many people out of Dachau and going west because they could hear the bombs in the background that the Americans and the Russians were coming. They were closer and closer. So they tried to get all the prisoners and march them further away so that they couldn't be liberated. My mother was on the death march, but my father got caught stealing the potatoes, and the Nazis beat him really, really badly in the head and beat him unconscious. So they thought they killed him, that they left him for dead, and they were all getting out because they were being, you know, liberation was right literally the next day. And so my father, when the camp was liberated, was unconscious on the ground, still, you know, as a result of the beatings. The day after liberation, he woke up.
Okay.
So he woke up. There were no uniforms. There were no guns. He thought he was in heaven. Isn't that an amazing story?
Yeah, I
Like,
mean,
he came conscious and everything was different around him. People were walking around with food, he said. And he didn't know what to make of it. Sorry, I'm just
so
gonna pick the other dog up. So they took him days. Sorry, you're gonna see a dog in the background.
that's fine.
I've got another dog who is handicapped, so I have to pick him up. He can't get up. So he was convinced after about a week, and my mother wasn't there because she was on the death march, so he had been, he was looking for her because she was the woman he was handing the appeals to. He was tortured by the Nazis, in front of many of the other camp victims as an example. Don't do this or this will happen to you. There's some horrible stories of what was done to him. The beating was just one of them. When he was caught with stealing potato peels at another time, they put him on a box in the center of Dachau, and they put a potato in his mouth, and they put electrical wires. So if he would have much as flinched for 24 hours, he would have been electrocuted. And they brought all the prisoners out
just
to
to watch
show
him.
them. Yep.
Yeah,
And my
yes.
mother said that she said to her sister, who was also in the camp with her, "You see that brave man?" My mother was 15 at the time. "See that brave man? If he survives and I survive, I'm going to marry him someday." And she did.
True to a word. Yeah, very good. But I can understand though, after the beating and when he woke up the following day, that would have been the 20th of April, I think,
Right.
That he would think that he died, had gone to heaven, because what else could you think? Like, after seeing all the horrors and being through all that ordeal. But that's amazing. It's
And a fascinating story.
Yeah, it's sad, but also very hopeful and joyful in a way at the same time. But yeah. But that must, of course, must have had some impact on his life. And you said yourself, he was quite ill.
Yeah,
For
he had
years.
seizures, years. What they turned out to find out was that the beating that he got caused his brain to bleed. But instead of killing him, as a lot of brain bleeds do, like from concussions and stuff like that, the blood formed a tumor.
Okay.
And the tumor was in his brain. Like the blood coagulated, gathered together and formed a hard mass. And so he was in an incredible amount of pain, had seizures, had brain surgery, and didn't survive. I mean, he survived that, but he was very, very sick, and then he died. He was only in his 40s when he died.
1974, was it? I think he died.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I had a quick look, so he must have been 49
He was
at
40.
the
He
time.
was just before his 49th birthday. He passed
Yeah.
away.
But yeah, that okay, he
But
survived.
he said to me, "The Nazis did not kill me. I am not dying until my children are grown."
Okay.
And I was his youngest. And in his eyes, grown meant 18 graduating high school. And he died a month after I graduated high school.
Okay. At least he saw you graduate high school then.
He was tenacious as in a wheelchair with seizures. He was going to my high school graduation, and he did.
Okay. I mean, that's lovely. That's
Yeah.
no other words for that, I suppose. But still, though, he died in 74. That's 19 years after the war. So for 19 years, he still lived in a bit of a hell, really, with all the seizures. So, and yet he kept going, and that's just. But that's what I so admire. But often hear the stories of survivors. They keep going. There's no stopping them. They just keep going regardless. What you said, the resilience in them is just so fascinating.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but how did it impact you growing up? I mean, you're saying he was telling you the stories when you're 10, 11. Of course, a 10-year-old, 11-year-old child can't comprehend all that horrors, I suppose. So, but how did it impact you later in life, or did it at all?
Oh my God, it's affected me a lot. I definitely have PTSD. I definitely have second generation PTSD. I'm certainly triggered by what happened October 7th, and I've been a wreck ever since. I myself struggle with a lot of depression and anxiety, a lot. And I also got all the negative or painful parts of growing up with two traumatized parents. My mother was very different, and she was really incapable of loving. So she couldn't love her children. She had us, but she was still in her survival mode. Like, she would step over her children to put herself first in every situation. Um, my father was very different. He would say, for every act of horror that I saw, I want to put an act of kindness in the world. And so he was this incredible, he was this very generous man. And I got that from him. So I'll give somebody the shirt off my back. I'll help anybody. I'm still carrying on the putting kindness in the world. And I'm still struggling with the depression, the anxiety, the fear. Um, I can hear horror. It definitely molded my profession, because I can hear the most horrible, traumatic story and bear witness to somebody's truth as they share their pain with me. So that's amazing. I don't have a lightheartedness about me. I have a very dark. Now, this is not true for all children of Holocaust survivors. Some of the parents were, silly, and just like joyful. I think my experience was also colored by the fact that I had a terminally ill father throughout my childhood. He was going in and out of hospitals, and I would sit in my elementary school and hear the ambulance in the background and wonder, is they taking him away? Is he having another seizure? He was so sick. So I think that colored it a lot. I think not having extended family was a huge impact. Holidays, it was just us. Passover was very difficult. My parents both missed their families so much. And the Passover Seder, we would sit down and they would both cry through it. And we were
Yeah.
like, my brother, sister, and I were like, well, can't we just skip the Seder? And we dreaded it, because that was, the Passover Seder is like Christmas to the Christian world. I mean, it's like where families gather and people share. And so that holiday was really rough. And my
Yeah.
mother had a brother who survived and lived in New York. And we made a decision to go have Seders with them, because we thought maybe that would be better for my parents. So if we could take my father, sometimes he was too sick to travel, we would travel to New York to my mother's brother. Um, my mother's brother married a very Orthodox woman, and the whole family became much more like Hasidim, and actually kind of rejected us because we were the heathens. We weren't Orthodox,
Mhm.
but which is a very sad story, because you don't reject the little bit of family you have, but it is what it is. So I think that it affects me every day of my life. I'm very tuned into victimization. I'm very much about doing the right thing, helping people. I see somebody carrying something heavy, I run over and I help them carry. I mean, I have for every act of horror that I see, I'm going to add an act of kindness. That was implanted from my dad, and that is how I live my life. And
That's a good way to live your life, to kind of try
yeah,
to find a balance. Even it might be impossible at times, but that's it's good to find that balance. I have to say, I looked at your website as well, and what struck me was the line in it said, "Your history is not your destiny," and I think that's so much truth in that.
and my
Sometimes,
website, yeah,
yeah,
your
yeah. I
history is
mean,
not your destiny.
I love that line, and there's so much truth
Thank
in it.
you.
Sometimes people just get stuck in
Yep.
the history, and understandably, some cases, of course, but it doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help, and I always find that. Having said that, though, I've never been to these kind of circumstances. I wouldn't know myself how I would react. Maybe I would be stuck in the history, but it's such a positive line, and it's
Yeah.
great. So just to see that, even after all the stories you've heard from your parents, but going back to your mother, and you not you felt she didn't love you. This is not uncommon, though. I've heard that from other children of survivors as well, that
You
they
know
had
what?
that
I don't
that
think
feeling.
she She didn't love me. She couldn't love me, but she couldn't love my brother or sister either. It wasn't that I was targeted.
Yeah.
It was my mother was able to love my father because she went through the war with him, love her brother. She could love the people she went through the trauma with, but anybody beyond that, she was not capable.
Yeah.
And she did some, I mean, she did some pretty, she put us in bad spots. Like if we went to the store, and in those days, the price tags were put on with straight pins. You know, they pin the price tag. Like if you're buying a sweater, the price. If the sweater was say marked $20 and she thought it was only worth $10, she would take the price tag off and switch it, and which is stealing. And she would
Yeah.
have us do it. And if we refused to do it, she would beat us. So
Mhm.
we hated going to a store with her. It's an interesting dynamic. It's not just her, but other survivors also that after going through so much trauma, some of them just didn't follow the rules. Like they thought the sweater was worth $10. They paid $10. Who the hell cares if it was marked $20 on the store? And
Yeah.
it's interesting. Like or they didn't want to wait to get, and they went through a red light. They went through a red light, so you never knew. There was sort of this unpredictability in her that was
Maybe
like,
maybe there's something to do with people actually lived through World War II as well. Because my mother had the same. If you would go to shop
really?
and she didn't like the price, she would just stay, change the price tag. So
She would change it too?
yeah, she would
Really? Isn't that
not
funny?
often, but she did it, and sometimes she should take things and but she had a bit of a bizarre conscience as well. She wouldn't take the lowest price tag; she would take the one in between. So if something was 20 euros, and she would take not from 10, but she'd take 15. Like
Oh my God. Isn't that
so,
wild?
yeah. So maybe there's something in that generation of people who lived
Maybe.
through.
I
Yeah,
don't know. I mean, I'm like, I follow all the rules. I'm one of those people that like, and and I think it's because of that, but you never
yeah,
knew.
yeah,
You never knew what she was going to ask you to do, and it was kind of scary.
yeah. I mean, yeah, of course, and because your mother is the person you look up to, is your security blanket. And if she tells you to
Right.
do something, you do it.
That's right.
So yeah, that's I can understand that. No, luckily my mother never forced me to do anything like that, because she know that I would give out her anyhow. So she would do it sneakily.
Yeah.
So now I wouldn't know, but. Uh, um, yeah, no, and I find these stories I just find so amazing. Yeah, and I think, as I said before we started, they need to be told more with the rise of anti-Semitism now as well. It's I don't know why that is, but maybe we'll find out some stage.
You know what? It's always there. It's always
Yeah,
there. It's since the beginning of time. I don't know if it's in DNA. I don't know if it's, partially activated. I mean, my father said to me, "You are just a visitor in this country," meaning the United States.
yeah.
He
Even though you're
said,
born there.
keep your passport updated, keep some money in the house, be ready to pack up and leave, because we've been thrown out of every country. Eventually they're going to hate us here too, and there's nothing you can do about it except prepare yourself.
Yeah, it's sad, isn't it?
So he knew, and it's true. But he
Yeah,
was right. He was trying to give us the messages that there's no justice. There's no reason that Jews are hated. Just you know, when I get up in the morning and I see a Facebook page and there's a sign, "Gas all the Jews today," or International Intifada, kill as many ISIS has kill as many Jews as you can today, last Friday. For what?
yeah. Yeah, uh, uh, I visited Munich this year and Dachau, and we went to the Jewish Museum in Munich, and they had a timeline of the Jews living in Munich, and just it was a timeline of hate, of them being hated all the time from the 12th
Wow.
century onwards to the late 20th century. So and I couldn't see a reason for it. There's no, I mean, I'm not Jewish myself, I'm Christian, but I mean, we're the same people. We're all the
Right.
same. I mean,
We have the same blood. We bleed the same way. I mean, I
same
don't see the difference
oxygen.
between my
No,
Christian friends and me. Yeah, I agree.
no, yeah. I mean, that's what makes it so sad. It's not even racism. It's probably bigotry. I think. I don't know. It's probably a combination, and but that's why these stories, though, that they are important to be
Yep.
told. That people say, well, has been suffering and is still suffering. And we shouldn't have to be this way. So, yeah,
I think our silence is our greatest enemy. So my
yeah,
feeling is we can't stop anti-Semitism, but what we need to do is have people around us stand up and say we won't tolerate it here.
yeah.
That's the best that we can do.
Silence has always been the killer when it comes to
And
that.
when you look at like in America, the civil rights movement, the Jews were right next to the Black community marching, but the Black community is not marching with us now.
Yeah.
And the women's movement not marching with us now. All of the ones that we support and promote, we're still alone.
Hmm.
We're still alone. No one's marching with us. The atrocities of October 7th, of course, what's happening in Gaza is awful. None of us like that. I mean, none of us feel neutral about that. But decapitating babies in their beds at 6:30 in the morning, burning them in the oven. I mean, it was a pogrom, which has been promised to be continued. Hamas is saying we're going to keep doing this. So, so it gives the world an opportunity to see us as oppressors again, because they want to see, they hate Jews.
Yeah.
In the 18th century, it was about Bible. It was about the Bible. It's the context of anti-Semitism changes from century to century or whatever, but it's consistently anti-Semitic.
I had this discussion once with someone that they said, well, the hate is there because the Jews killed Jesus. I said, well, actually, it was the Romans who did. So if you want to hate
That's
somebody,
right.
you should be hating the Italians, really. And you couldn't comprehend that. So
and the Pope declared that, what, in 1963, 64?
yeah,
came out and said the Jews did not kill Jesus.
no,
And Jesus was a Jew, for God's sakes.
yeah, exactly.
You
No,
know,
we're kind of running out of time. So again, it was a fascinating story. But and I just want to finish what you said earlier on as well. That I think it's important people realize this, that none of us likes what's happening in Gaza.
none of us,
None of us. And I think
none of
that's
us, no Jewish person is.
yeah,
We are all watching the humans suffering and suffering along with them.
yeah.
Our hearts are breaking. This is not what we want. I mean, no, I
And
don't know one Jewish person who feels differently than that, honestly.
and that's important to realize, because people think who are not that aware of what's happening, they think, well, it's they do this on purpose, they love this, and it's not the case. And
We're
I
not
think that's
violent people. We're just not violent
exactly.
people. I mean, we have, as a result of the Holocaust, learned how to fight back. And I don't even agree with a lot of Netanyahu's stuff. I don't believe, I mean, I support 100% the survival of Israel, but I don't like the politics of it. I don't agree with at all. I don't live there, so maybe I don't have a right to say that, but I don't agree with the politics of the American government either, for God's sakes. I mean, but you don't hate a group of people, you know what I
Just
mean?
because,
Because of
yeah,
it.
exactly. And yeah, and on that note, I think is a great note to finish up. And thank you
Okay.
for this.
My
And
pleasure.
I'm pretty
I'm
sure
glad
we'll
this
be in
worked
touch
out. We're
again,
able to
Annie.
do this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And
If you have
yeah,
any future questions, feel free to call
no,
me
of
or
course,
text.
of course, we will do that.
Okay.
Thanks, Lynn.
Take care. Bye-bye.